We are joined now by Hayden Dublois, research analyst at the Foundation for Government Accountability. You can check out all things FGA at the FGA on Twitter, also FGA.com. Hayden, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us here on a Wednesday morning.
Thank you, Tim, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so Hayden, I'm looking at this report right now. Folks can follow along and read at home. TheFGA.org is where you can find it. The title of the report that yourself and Jonathan, two of your colleagues, Jonathan Bain and Jonathan Ingram, just published last week is Food Stamp Work Requirements Worked for Missourians. I think some folks, Hayden, may be surprised about what the state of affairs was before Missouri made this change. So, Hayden, people hear the term food stamps all the time. What is the food stamp program here in the state of Missouri? What is the status of it? Who qualifies for it? What does it do for people in 2020 America?
Sure. Well, food stamps are formally called the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program that's run by the federal government. Now, prior to it's typically intended for folks in time of need with certain asset and income limits who are in need of services and in need of help to get nutrition to their family. But another category that qualifies is able-bodied adults. Now, that's the main category that this report focuses on. And the state of affairs in Missouri prior to 2016 was that able-bodied childless adults from 18 to roughly 50 years old were able to participate in the program without having to abide by traditionally federally required work requirements. Now, that was because Missouri continued to receive a waiver for having these able-bodied adults to participate in these requirements under then Governor Nixon. So what we saw in Missouri was enrollment that was really much higher than it should have been. About 1 in every 6 households, or roughly 855,000 individuals, were on food stamps, which was actually a higher level than were enrolled on the program during the Great Recession. And a huge portion of this enrollment was driven by able-bodied childless adults in the working age category. And what we know is that 82% of them didn't work at all, and less than 1% of them worked full-time. So what we saw was, as a result of these waivers continuing to be implemented in Missouri, you had a significant portion of the food stamp population who could work, were able to work, but weren't required to work. So they were languishing and getting stuck in this cycle of dependency. And that created a lot of problems for taxpayers and for the enrollees themselves. They weren't getting back to work, and they weren't, otherwise earning an income they could have, because that would have meant they weren't qualifying for those benefits. So it was a big problem for Missouri.
Yeah, Hayden, let's jump in our Wayback Machine, and we would notice if we went back to 2010 that Missouri was in a lot of the same situations that it currently is in, right? So about 10 years ago, we were coming off of a Great Recession. Doesn't that sound familiar? Unemployment was at around 10%. Doesn't that sound familiar? But 5 years later, in 2015, the economy picked up steam. The unemployment rate had been cut in half to 4.4. That sounds familiar. Hayden, we're coming out of a recession much faster this time. We've done it all within 5 months versus 5 years, but very similar statistics that we saw back then. But one of the things, as you point out in this report, was as we came out of the recession, as people were as jobs were becoming available, people were not encouraged to go back to work because Governor Jay Nixon had a waiver in place where people didn't have to look for work and they could continue to just sit around and be on welfare. Well, that was a big problem back in 2010, wasn't it?
Right. That's exactly right, Tim. And it was creating this and fostering this cycle of dependency that we see in other states around the country who continue to waive these federally required work requirements that tell able-bodied adults on the program that you have to participate in work or training activities for a minimum number of hours in order to continue receiving benefits. Now, I want to be clear. This isn't something that we're talking about kicking the truly needy off the program,
Sure.
which is what we often hear from the other side. We're talking about applying this to folks who are in a category where they're able to work, folks under the age of 60, if you're disabled or if you're caring for a young child or if you're, a victim of domestic assault, you're not required to participate in this. This is truly intended for able-bodied adults. And again, as you pointed out, under Governor Nixon, these were being waived. And so what we saw was, despite the economic picture that was rosy, and you're right, similar to the situation we're finding ourselves in now and immediately pre-COVID, food stamp enrollment was up. In fact, I actually looked at the numbers more recently. Missouri had more people on food stamps during this relatively robust economic time than it did immediately after COVID hit, a significant number more. And we know COVID caused a spike in enrollment, obviously, because business closures and the economic slowdown. So, and I can attribute a large portion of that to able-bodied adults not having to work. What happened was, in 2015, the Missouri legislature overrode Governor Nixon's veto so they could finally implement these work requirements. Actually, then Senator Parson, now Governor Parson, played a big role in that. And the results have just been incredible for Missourians and have produced some major trends.
Yeah, Hayden, before we get into what happens when you promote welfare to work, something President Bill Clinton promoted quite heavily back in the 1990s, I want to point out this staggering statistic in your report, and that report can be found at thefga.org. We're talking to Hayden Dublois, research analyst at the Foundation for Government Accountability right now at the FGA on Twitter. Hayden, at the height of the enrollment, we're talking in 2015 when Missouri had largely recovered from the Great Recession, along with the rest of the country. Happy days were here again. Missourians, to the tune of 855,000 of us, were still receiving food stamps, with 15% more people on the program than even during the Great Recession. I mean, nearly 900,000 Missourians, Hayden. I mean, our population is only 6.1 million. That couldn't have been a good thing for the workforce, for the economy, for small business, to have people being encouraged, being incentivized by the government not to go back to work during one of the best boom periods our state and our country has ever seen.
You're exactly right, and it was hampering Missouri's ability to grow its economy, to fill open jobs, for businesses to grow, for the workforce to grow, and it was a major impediment to all of those economic drivers that were otherwise occurring, but were being stifled by government stepping in and saying folks who were able-bodied childless adults didn't have to participate in work or training programs in order to receive food stamp benefits. And it was a huge driver for preventing otherwise robust economic activity that we would have seen, and we wound up seeing after these work requirements were imposed. So, it was truly a sad state of affairs prior to the imposition of these work requirements. In fact, in 2015, Missouri had 15% more people on food stamps than it did during the Great Recession of 2009 and 2010, which is pretty remarkable. Food stamp enrollment was, at a near all-time high, as you said, 855,000 people. I mean, that's a remarkable figure considering Missouri's population. The program was costing roughly $1.3 billion every year. It was an enormous expense to the taxpayer. It was an incredible strain on state resources that are truly should be reserved for the most vulnerable among us. And it was creating the cycle of dependency that was hampering economic growth.
Yeah, Hayden, the two biggest negative consequences I see coming out of this really bad welfare policy are that, number one, it truly hampers growing economies when they have the ability to grow the best, right? In the years where isn't it true, Hayden, that in the years immediately succeeding a recession, that's when we have some of the most meteoric growth. And so by doing this, aren't you stifling that growth? And number two, aren't you taking away much needed resources from the truly needy? Some folks on the other side of the political spectrum from me think that I guess money grows on trees, but it doesn't, does it, Hayden? So you're harming growth, and at the same time you're harming those who truly need the resources. Are those the two biggest negative consequences you see that came out of this really bad policy that was promoted by Governor Nixon?
Absolutely. You are hampering economic growth by discouraging work and encouraging welfare. It's that simple. And when you tell folks who are able-bodied, childless adults in the working age category that they can participate in a program without having to abide by work requirements that are, that have been promoted, by as people as high up as Bill Clinton, as you mentioned, you're telling them, well, that it's okay to accept welfare. It's okay to get trapped in the cycle of dependency. And that's not only not good for them, not good for the economy, but, it really keeps those individuals down as well and keeps them, from achieving their full potential, from realizing the American dream. The second effect, which you, no doubt noted, is that it robs resources from the truly needy. These are dollars that would otherwise go towards the most vulnerable, folks with disabilities or with very young children in the household who might be victims of domestic assault, our senior population. These are resources that are being diverted away from them and instead being spent on a population which could work, but doesn't have to because the state is saying they don't. I would add a third category that's being harmed by this is, of course, the taxpayer, who's on the hook for paying the costs of the program for able-bodied adults to not have to work, which is, incredibly frustrating for Missouri taxpayers around the country in the states that still have not moved into a situation where work requirements have to be imposed. So I think those are the seriously negative trends that we see in these states.
Yeah. So Hayden, before I let you go, what has been the moral of the story? As the legislature overrode a Democratic Governor Jay Nixon back in 2015, put back in work requirements for food stamps, the welfare to work model that used to be trumpeted by both political parties. We used to celebrate work. Both political parties used to celebrate work. We used to encourage it, especially in the best of times when jobs were aplenty. What has been the moral of the story here in the state of Missouri as to the change in this program?
Well, counter to the other side of the political spectrum would have you believe, it's been good news, and that's the title of the paper is Work Requirements Truly Have Worked for Missouri. Enrollment fell by 85% in just the first year after these work requirements were imposed, which is pretty remarkable. But when you think about it, it's the same trend we've seen in other states. Arkansas did this. Their enrollment fell by 70%. Florida fell by 94%. Kansas, Mississippi, and Maine. And contrary to what, those on the left side of the political spectrum would lead you to believe, these aren't people who are left languishing out in the streets. Within 3 months, these individuals, these enrollees, their wages had gone up by 70% because they went back to work. And eventually, their income actually doubled. Remarkable.
That is fantastic.
Yeah,
it's really fantastic. Yeah. Folks, you can read the entire report at thefga.org. Hayden, I wish we had more time. We'll have to have you back on again to talk about maybe some of the proposals we're seeing in the legislature next year, and depending on who is victorious in the presidential election, how that might affect the state of Missouri as well. Everything is at thefga.org, at the FGA on Twitter. Our guest this morning was Hayden Dublois, research analyst for the Foundation for Government Accountability. Hayden, thanks for all of your great work that you and everybody at the FGA continues to do to help move Missouri forward.
Great. Thank you, Tim. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. It was our pleasure.